Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from the Japanese Friendship Garden in Phoenix, Arizona. This is Doug Brunke, the CEO and founder of Global Chamber, and we've got a wild and woolly one for you. It's all about Asia. It's all about the workforce in Asia, and what we're going to do, we're going to speak to three extraordinary experts about Asia. We've got Sachiko Yoshimura, who's calling in from Tokyo. We've got Claudio Toyama, who's in Washington, D.C. We've got a team behind the scenes who will be playing a recording of Leila Aridi Afas of Toyota Motor Company. What we found out a few days ago was that she had a commitment at this time she wasn't able to do it live. And so the good news is we've got her recorded, and we've got even some questions. And so the folks behind the scenes, Cesar, you want to run that tape and we'll go from here. And thank you for your patience, audience. Yes.
Thank you, Doug. It's a pleasure to join everyone. I'm sorry that I could not participate in the live webinar, but due to the wonders of technology, I'm able to join you via recording. And this is a topic that I think is really increasingly important. And you know, we have monumental changes happening all over the world, especially in the trade arena, and most notably in Asia. I mean, we have this historic Trans-Pacific Partnership, which will, of course, go into effect at the end of this year, and that provides tremendous opportunities. And although the United States retreated from the deal at the beginning of 2017, there's still ways that U.S. companies can benefit from it. Additionally, in terms of Japan, they also have a trade agreement directly with the European Union that, and that will be a monumental, because if you take the economic might of the countries involved in the TPP, and then you add into that the European Union, I mean, you're talking about like 2/3 of the world's economic power. So I think it's really an incredible opportunity and to really leverage sort of the expertise and the geographical advantages that it provides to companies, regardless of which sectors that you're actually involved in. I've had the pleasure of working with Toyota for about the past 2.5 years, and although I'm based in the United States, I am able to travel to Japan quite frequently, and I work very closely with our colleagues at Toyota Motor Corporation, our headquarters, and it's really been a tremendous experience, and the ability to learn directly from them and engage on so many issues, because my role is a global role that kind of I touch upon anything that really crosses a border. And I think that provides a great perspective and a great way to see how they work together. And one question I'm commonly asked is, what is it like to be a woman working for a company in the auto industry, but also a Japanese company? And I have to say it's been remarkably rewarding. And I think there are many sort of things at work that have been in place since I joined the company. Most notably, Prime Minister Abe, of course, launched his economic strategy in the 3 arrows, and one of those arrows, of course, was including more women in the workforce and development, and many of the senior colleagues I coordinate with directly in Japan are women, and it's been tremendously fruitful to have the ability to work together directly, and where I can provide sort of translation of what's happening as much as possible on the U.S. side, and they can provide sort of their insight on what's happening on the Japanese side. I think being able to leverage those cultural insights along with the technical expertise and, of course, the experience that we bring to the table has been really effective, especially as, my area, which, of course, is global trade, has been increasingly intensified sort of focus area for not just our company, but companies all over the globe. And so, I really think that with the prior administration, there was this pivot towards Asia. And I think that's where the direction we need to keep going is just if you look at the demographic shifts and you look at where the growth is and where the fastest growing economies are, it's Asia and also sub-Saharan Africa. And I think that as our own economy, we're kind of reaching our maturation point in many different issues, in many different areas, as well as our own declining population growth rates. I mean, it's a tremendous time to look outside our own borders. And I know the Commerce Department always likes to tout the statistic that 96% of the world's consumers are outside the United States. And that really is just a spin on the fact that only 4% of the world's population is here in America. And so it's really, I think there's really never been an easier time to engage, not only through digital trade and things like that, but also there's just an openness that I've seen just grow and expand over the past 10 to 15 years. And a lot of companies in Asia are looking for partners all over the world and how they can leverage sort of the technical expertise or the geographic knowledge or any form of unique insight from partners all over the world.
That sounds great. Thank you, Leila. In terms of some of the things that you've noticed in your years, have you seen an evolution in the way the company treats women, treats minorities, whether it's in the U.S. or beyond, either in your years or from comparing to how you interfaced with either Toyota or Japanese companies prior to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel right at home, put it that way. I mean, I just warmly embraced and professionally and just culturally as well, and just really proud of the fact that we have such an incredibly diverse group, not just at the lower levels, throughout the entire ranks, all ranks of the organization. I mean, we have 10 plants in the United States, for example, and 2 of those plant presidents are women. I think a lot of people are surprised to learn, and many of the senior executives in our C-suite are women, or other groups, and many minority groups are represented, and I think that's critical, because when you have a consumer-facing industry and you sell products to a diverse group of people, you need the insight and the perspective of a diverse group of people at the board, and putting providing their sort of unique views or understanding how things may work or not work, I think is critical to the success of any company.
Gotcha. You've traveled to Japan quite a number of times in your role. How would you compare kind of the way things are over there, and do you have to act a little bit differently when you're over there versus when you're here in the U.S.?
One thing that's so wonderful about Japan is this just incredibly rich culture, and they've really done a marvelous job of marrying together like modernity with antiquity. So you see like these ancient temples and then like the high-speed rail. And so underlying all of that is this just tremendous respect for people, for the environment, for everything. And so I would say there probably is a heightened respect during meetings. I mean, just in terms of how you respond to people. It's not quite so jokey as it might be in the U.S. or not quite so casual. It's probably more formal, but again, it comes from this deep respect for what other person has to say, and true listening. I mean, I am always amazed by my colleagues how they just completely focus. Listen, nobody's checking their cell phone during a meeting or eyes are wandering. I mean, they're so present in the moment. And when I juxtapose that to being at a meeting in the U.S. where everybody's sort of got their eyes in their lap, sort of scrolling through their email or doing what else they might do, just comparing those and just understanding like, wow, I feel so much more like just honored, if you will, when you have everybody at the table who's just focused on you and not being distracted versus sort of what it can be like, what people I think most Americans are accustomed to and how we work. And there's just this unbelievable attention to detail in order. You have to be on time. If you're not, 10 minutes early or late. Things like that having worked previously in the Middle East and Africa was completely different. If you showed up 10 minutes early, their building wouldn't even be open. So I feel very grateful that I'm able to have so many different experiences and just see such, just the harmony. I can't even explain. Doug, you probably, I know you know firsthand, but there's just this harmonious aspect to how even something like business takes place, let alone when you're looking at the artwork or the architecture or gardens or things like that.
Yeah, you used a word there, modernity.
Yeah.
Basically the modern world, right?
The modern world.
And the way it juxtaposes against the Japanese tradition, and I think that tells me that you've been there long enough to understand how all that works, and you're sensitive and respectful enough of how they look at the world. I think, and let me ask you this regarding. You mentioned about the plant managers in the U.S., 2 of the 10 being women. In a greenfield or a new opportunity, starting like that with women is easy in the modern world, or easier, if you will, when you think about Japan and an existing workforce. In my days of calling on Toyota, it was like, I'm not even sure I ever met a woman, although I think there were probably a few along the way. It was almost non-existent 20 or 30 years ago. So the transition is happening, right? You've got to kind of eventually move people to the point. So the change must be happening slower in Japan, but it's happening faster in the U.S. and in other countries where Toyota is entering, and they're going everywhere, right? They've been growing in Asia, they've been growing in the Middle East, as you mentioned, they've been growing around the world. Does that give them then the freedom to be able to implement, management systems and personnel systems that are better fitted for those local markets?
Well, in the case of Japan, a lot of my direct counterparts are at the executive level are women. And so, and it's really, talent-based, merit-based, which is wonderful. And I think that it's indicative of something you see throughout the company. If you look, whether it's Europe or any of their other markets, as you mentioned, several of them where they operate. So, and I think they definitely do take into account, the culture, what the local culture is and the customs. I mean, their philosophy is to build where you sell and to buy where you build. So they really do go out of their way to understand the local customs, the norms, and really cherish the talent pool that is in the markets where they operate, and the rich diversity among those different markets all over the world.
Okay. So thinking about a company from Canada or the U.S. or Germany, and they're doing business in Japan, let's start there. I mean, what are some of the guidelines that you would suggest in terms of how they should be thinking about setting up their management, based on what you've seen to be successful with Toyota?
Well, I think one thing that I always encourage companies to do is that when they want to work in a foreign country is to always go to their embassy in that country. So again, if you're a Canadian, going to the Canadian embassy, or French embassy, because there is a rich treasure trove of information that they have, whether it's market research, whether it's help business development planning. I mean, in terms of our own U.S. government, they have this commercial service where you can go and they'll set up meetings for you. If you're looking for maybe somebody could be a distributor for you, they can give you a short list of folks who meet the qualifications you provided. They could even do specific market research for you for just a nominal sum. I mean, it's really just a tremendous resource. And I think it's very important that before you enter a market that you understand that market, that you have local knowledge, and whether that's something that you form through partnership with somebody local, or whether you take the time and have the ability to, which oftentimes that is very difficult to do, to really immerse yourself in the culture. And I know, Doug, for you, I mean, that was something that you're able to do and was really attributable to a lot of your success. I think that's one thing that Toyota does when they go to markets, is really understanding the local culture, the customs, the government, the structure, and relying upon the local talent pool that is in those markets.
Gotcha. So really, in terms of diversity, in terms of gender balance, do what's right, and I presume then mirror the local market, or mirror what your company believes is the right approach in terms of going after business, whether you're setting up in Indiana, or whether you're setting up in Nagoya, or Seoul, or wherever you're setting up.
Exactly. No, exactly. And I think, and one thing I just want to add is that when it comes to diversity, it's not just male, female, or ethnicity, or religious values, or sexual orientation, but also just one thing we tend to ignore is people's ability, their mobility issues. Or not, my mother is mobility impaired, and I think that's something that we oftentimes don't pay attention to, or whether somebody's hearing impaired or vision impaired, but those are other forms of diversity and people who bring different perspectives to the table. When, again, you're consumer facing, you're making products. That's one thing we're very excited about with self-driving technology and the ability to help people who might not be able to have the freedom to move, give them that ability. And that's something too is enabled to make products and provide services that meet their needs, is making sure that their voices are heard as well within the company in order to make sure we're meeting like the needs of the entire planet, not just a select few.
Okay, so you took mobility in a little bit different way than I was expecting, which what you said was perfect. Where I was thinking would be kind of interesting to know and where things stand is, certainly, again, going back to my ancient days, you had to be in the office, at such and such a time. You went out to dinner and drinks with your coworkers. You do a company vacation. There's a series of things that are very binding for the folks, and so doing work from home would not even be a thought. It would be not even considered. Are those kinds of principles? Certainly your job is very mobile. Are those kinds of principles being looked at in more broadly to be able to take advantage of what's there?
Yeah, I think the principles, depending on your role, of course, what you're doing. I mean, here in Washington, my colleagues and I, a lot of it is meeting face-to-face with people and going to events and meeting with folks in the government, and so it's a lot of having to be present. But I think depending on what you're doing, I think that's like on a case-by-case basis. But wonderfully, there's so many different forms of technology. I mean, just the fact they're able to record the session in advance is testament to that.
Fantastic. I understand. So our next speaker is a director at JETRO, and you kind of touched on a little bit about using resources that are available to you. Certainly if you're a Canadian company or a U.S. company or German or Korean, there are federal government organizations that are supportive. That's why Global Chamber is around. So it's, no matter what country you're from, you can get help in the local market. JETRO, helps Japanese companies, whether they're leaving or coming. And so what kind of things have you done with JETRO, and would you like to say any remarks regarding the effectiveness that they've had with maybe not just Toyota, since Toyota is quite capable probably to do almost anything, but when you think about kind of tier 1 and tier 2 and some of the other supporters for Toyota, I'm imagining JETRO has been very supportive.
Oh, absolutely. And prior to joining Toyota, and I used to live in New York, I mean, JETRO was the go-to place. And they bring delegations, and they have fantastic matchmaking and information sharing. And really, it's a very tremendous, I think, sort of vehicle that folks can use. And so I'm delighted that the next speaker is from JETRO. I'm sorry that I am not with you live in order to hear it, but I'll have to watch the recording.
I really appreciate you taking the time today, and we'll catch up with you soon. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Doug.
So thank you again, audience here and around the world. We really appreciate your participation today, and apologize that Leila Aridi Afas was not available at the last minute, so we did record that. And what I would suggest, whether you're here or whether you're online and you have a question for Leila, please send that question to info@globalchamber.org, or you can also, if you're watching somewhere, and you can go into the chat area and we'll handle that question after the fact. We're very lucky to have our next two speakers live. And so we touched a little bit on JETRO, and Sachiko Yoshimura is Director General Trade Fair Department at JETRO. Yoshimura-san, you were the director also of the Los Angeles office of JETRO, and I think that's how we maybe originally met. And you've been very involved in not just helping Japanese companies in general, but the issue of gender balance and diversity for companies in Japan and coming into Japan has been a key part of what's important for you. It's also been important from the standpoint of the Japanese government in supporting more women in the workforce. And so a lot of what we wanted to talk about today was so that companies could understand what's happening and what are some of the changes. So we really appreciate you taking the time there early morning in Tokyo on Friday morning, December 7th, to share with us your thoughts.
Thank you, Doug. And I'd like to thank you for the nice introduction, and also thank you, Leila. So can you all hear me? It's a sound. Can you hear me right? Yes, okay?
Perfect.
Okay. Right,
absolutely
great.
perfectly. And it's in English too, which is absolutely
Right. Thank you. I've been working in Los Angeles, JETRO from 2012 to 2016. I really enjoyed matchmaking Japanese companies with US companies. And so today I'd like to talk to all of you about what's happening in the Japanese workforce. I've been working for JETRO for my whole life, so it's been nearly 30 years, such a long time. So I can say when I started working in JETRO, it's so different from now. For right now, we have, I think Japan is trying to accept more diversity. So I'd like to talk to you all about that. Just for static data, we have the Japanese government did a survey on how the ratio of the women in the workforce management area. In Japan, it's in 2014, it's 14.4%. Like when you compare that to the United States, it's 43%. And also comparing to Britain and England, it's 34.5%. So it's not as much as like comparing to the world, not too high. But actually the Abe administration is actually having this trying to expand this ratio to 30% until 2020, which is 2 years apart. And I really feel that it is starting to work. Actually, there's some problems in maybe in the both sides of the system, and also maybe in the mind of the women workforce in Japan. The Japanese government also did a survey of like, what do you think about having a woman in management? Actually, the Japanese women force was saying that they're actually uncomfortable yet, and that is because there's not too many Japanese women actually in management. But I'm surprised because the data for the males, the gentlemen saying they were really happy to have more women in management, and I think that's something that's going to change. Also, what I feel is also in the gender area, but also there are the new generation is changing. Like a Japanese company, actually, we have been working for maybe the lifetime, so it's a long employment. But actually, the younger people are more, in a way, creative, and they're looking for innovation. So they're not actually working for a large company for all their lives. And there's been a movement for more startup business in Japan as well. So I think that's something that, like the Japanese workforce were being closed for a long time. I think it's moving to a very good situation, trying to have the more larger diversity in their working force as well. Another point that I really would like to share with you is the Japanese government is trying to open up the workforce for non-Japanese people as well. For a long time, as you know, maybe the Japanese market for workforce was maybe focused for Japanese people only. But right now, as the Japanese population is gradually slowing down, we're trying to have more workforce from foreign countries. Right now, the government is actually trying to enforce a law for making more foreign people coming to Japan, working to Japan, which is maybe so different right now from the U.S. situation. And so the Japanese market, the workforce market is trying to open it up. That is, right now, the workforce from foreign companies foreign countries. It's mainly for Asia, and also there is a growing population of Indian workers as well. So I think what I'd like to share is the Japanese workforce is changing, and also there's many chances to do business in Japan, also expand all over into Asia. Also, like we did, JETRO did a survey as we're trying to promote foreign investment in Japan, and we asked the companies what is the problems in Japan, and most of the companies just pointed out that there are not many bilingual speakers working in their bilingual speakers that are available in Japan. So maybe the problem will be solved because we have more foreign workers in Japan. That might change the situation as well. So I think Japan is maybe working slow in the area of diversity, especially in women, but I think it's changing. So I really hope that I would like to share my experience in the United States with my colleagues in Japan, and everybody is very looking to another direction, that we need some more workforce, women in workforce, and also maybe different nationalities working in Japan as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoshimura-san. And we'll handle questions after the next speaker. And the next speaker is Claudio Toyama. He's the CEO and founder of Toyama&Co. He is an extraordinarily global guy. And he works with top companies on their leadership and elevating their leadership. He's based in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. And you're calling in from there. Claudio, thank you so much for sharing your expertise on this very important topic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Yoshimura-san, and also, to Leila as well. That was really fantastic. I was taking a lot of notes. What I would like to do is not to focus on Asia first, but to focus on what I'm seeing globally. And Doug, as you know, I have lived in 4 different continents and now living here in the U.S. What I'm seeing is, the global trends that are happening right now is that, for instance, here in the U.S., as this new president is kind of closing the borders, sort of, we have seen a decrease in number of students coming to the U.S. to study. We have seen a decrease in companies, wanting to be here in the U.S. And that, of course, that movement will go somewhere else. If there is a decrease coming here, there will be a movement to go somewhere else. So what we're seeing right now is a movement, from Asia to Europe, from Europe to Asia, and from other countries, there is this movement. What I'm also seeing is, what is happening with Europe, that, right now it is very tumultuous. So there is a huge opportunity for Asia, to really step up. I remember in the 80s and the 90s when Japan was just going skyrocketing, to become, one of the best, GDP countries in the world. And then, it's like, they were buying everything that they could see. I remember, they were coming here to the U.S. and buying all the businesses and everything. And then, there was that depression, that happened. And, it's like, okay, let's slow down a little bit. And then we saw the Asian tigers, coming up. Now we see South Korea and these, amazing companies, coming up. And you see, like Samsung and, all the other ones, coming up and being key global players in the marketplace. The other trend that I'm also seeing is how, because, that affects also, the global workforce, is having been living here in the U.S. for almost 10 years now, I have noticed how very insular, it can be. And, people don't know about, what is happening around the world. They know what is happening in their town or in their in their city. And it's great that we have global chamber to know more about the world. But it's very, very insular. It's like, okay, the US for the US. So one thing that I'm noticing is that in terms of competitiveness, what I'm seeing is that the Asian countries, they are growing very fast. They are taking over the world, and it feels like to me that the U.S. is kind of taking a step back, even from being the prominent country in the world. It is still number one in terms of GDP, but it's kind of taking a step back in terms of leading the world. And I see a huge opportunity also for the Asian countries, to, as we see, that Africa, there is a, very tumultuous. Europe is very tumultuous as well, and Latin America is also very tumultuous, and even North America. Now, what we're seeing here, Canada is a little bit more stable, but we see what is happening in here in the U.S. and also Mexico. I see a huge opportunity, for also Asian countries to be growing a lot and to be, to be, really taking the space, this vacuum that is being created, as I see right now. In terms of working in Asia, also there's this gap. Yes, there is this diversity that is happening, and when I worked in Japan, it was 25 years ago. It was a long time ago, so diversity was almost inexistent, and also the borders were not as open as they are right now. I could work there because I'm a Nisei, so my father was Japanese, so I had my documents, proving that I could work there, and it was fine, but they were not very open. They were still, Japan was still very insular as a country, not very open. So I welcome these changes that are happening in terms of the diversity and inclusion that are happening right now, that have been happening. And from 2014, as you said, Yoshimura-san, 2014, 14% of women in managerial, to 2020, 30%, is like, it's a huge growth, huge growth. And, and I know that Japan can do it. I know that it can do it. And of course, we have the Olympic Games, coming up in 2 years' time, or even, a year and a half, Olympic Games, coming up in Tokyo. And so there are massive opportunities, coming up in not only in Japan. I know that we're focusing on Japan right now, but I see also, South Korea, I see Singapore, I see, Hong Kong, I see, other parts of Asia, China has been booming a lot as well. There's a lot happening in Asia.
Okay, thank you, Claudio. Appreciate your comments there. We do have some questions coming in, and what I encourage the audience, probably the best thing for you to do would be to walk up and stand here and then just ask your question, because it'll be hard to hear. So anybody have a question? It's starting to germinate. Just come on up. In the meantime, the questions that we have coming in, one question, this is regarding pretty much a little bit more definition around, and this may be for you, Yoshimura-san, regarding what is the government doing? So they have these goals, and so what does the Japanese government do for companies to be able to get these numbers? They're applying some sort of a pressure. There might be some sort of incentives. What actually is happening for those improvements to happen?
Yes, thank you for the question. The Japanese governments are also pressuring the companies as well, but actually what the companies are trying to do is, of course, having more chances for Japanese women to be staying at the company. That means taking more maternity leave. Also, there's a problem in for the government, there's not enough nursery schools or preschools that the mothers can actually, working mothers could actually have their children go in there. So they're trying to actually extend that as well. Also in Japan, it just started, the government is trying to start the working in their homes as well, using computers, devices, which is we're having an experiment in JETRO as well, which is working pretty well. So I think what the government is trying to do is, of course, making more the capacity of like schools for working mothers that they can take care of, but also the companies are trying to make more diversity in how to work in the Japanese companies. So I think that's something that would be the start, because being a manager needs experience, or maybe not so working hours. Maybe if the person has even, in Japan, the companies are still working for a very long time. After like 5 o'clock, many people still work until like 9 or 10 in the evening, and that is a kind of custom. And when you want to have be a manager or maybe more in a company, you need to work for a long time. But I think the companies are trying to change that. So they're asking employees to leave until 7 o'clock. And actually they're turning off the lights. Otherwise, the Japanese employees are very keen to work. So they have to like turn off the lights and everything. And it's really basic things, but the companies are trying to do that as well. And also JETRO is doing that as well. So there's people, the management cast will come all to our offices and just turn off the lights and say, ask leaving, which sometimes it has a problem, because when we really need to work, we have to work at home. But still, I think it's something to, the basic things like that will change the situation of working in a company.
Gotcha. So the government and JETRO, you mentioned, I think there may be some initiatives around getting women in the workforce as well. Is that true? Could you talk to us a little bit about that? And since to get into the workforce, there's a training component, right? So it really has to start earlier in school, including college education. And so what's happening there that's changing with young people?
I think maybe their education itself, the system itself isn't changing rapidly, but I think the mind of like when like 30 years ago, the student would really work hard at college, not to actually enter a Japanese famous large company. That was the target of working. But right now, I think the younger generation knows more that maybe they're looking more globally and sees more the way to actually work. It's not just working for a large company, working every day and until the evening, and then having like sake after that with their bosses. That's I think the younger generation doesn't want that. So I think they're trying to the idea is different for the younger people. Maybe it's not the education, but the style of working for is changing right now. Also, maybe the government has, I don't have the statistics, but they're asking their companies to have like certain, we were asked to have 30% of management until 2020 as well. So the government is asking the companies to actually have 30% in each company's women's management post. But the problem right now is that in JETRO as well, even though we're trying to have more management class women, because they haven't had the training for management, what we're trying to do is making a short program for training for management. And so we have actually working with the management class for maybe 2 weeks or so. And it's like, so we have a mentor as well, and so we're trying to do that in JETRO.
Okay. Very good. We have a question from the floor here, Barry Wong, who works for the state of Arizona. Barry.
Yes, hi, Yoshimura-san. Thank you for the background about the role of women in the Japan culture and in corporations. The question I have is there a movement to promote more on merit base as opposed to the traditional seniority? And also with regard to, for example, in America, there's women's groups and corporate executives that are women, just like Sheryl Sandberg, for example, at Facebook. How do you encourage women to have the opportunity to get promoted? Oftentimes you have the male culture of playing golf, drinking together. Is there a similar opportunity for the women to move up to have that type of engagement in relationships so they can improve their chances of promotion?
Mm-hmm.
So two-edged questions there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting question. Yes, I think it's very because right now in the workforce in Japan is still in the male based. So we've heard that there's many decisions made when they're drinking. The bosses are drinking sake after work. Also, that's something that the women are feeling frustrating because they couldn't do that. But for the example for JETRO, what we're trying to do is, of course, the decision but when you make a decision, of course, it's not at a sake place. What we do is like a share in when we make a decision, we have a meeting every week, which we actually promote asking all the management class to share their observations, not privately, but having a conference every day and also sharing with emails. So because there was some of the complaints that the woman saying, oh, I didn't know the decisions were made after work. So we're trying to change that. That's something very small, but that is important. Also, I think it's what I felt when I was in the United States. There was like a kind of like a global woman workforce like network. I don't think we have enough in Japan. So what we're trying to do is not just the same JETRO, but I'm trying to get network between other women who's working in all different kind of workforce. There are some, I think there's movement of get together all the management class and share their experience. So I think it's important not just to do it in one company, but have a network that. And I think I was talking with Doug in Japan that we need to do something like to have more network between not just one company, but all and between all Japanese different kind of diversity companies. So I think I am trying to find this many kind of connections that might be interested in doing that kind of network. And I know there are a few networks already, so I encourage my colleagues to actually go there and to share some information. So I think it's important to know that share the difficulty that working in a mainly male kind of workforce. So that's what I'm actually doing right now.
So, and Yoshimura-san, very interested to follow up with you on that. There's been a lot of progress, as you know, in the last couple years in those areas. We've outreached, as an example, to a group called Josei Shacho. So, a group of, I think it's actually run by a New Zealand lady, but basically, the concept of getting women presidents together, getting women leaders together across companies to learn from each other and to mentor each other. And so that's definitely something that we're advancing there and would love to follow up with you on that as well. We have a next question from David, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name is David Morse, and I'm kind of new to the Scotts Phoenix area. And Actually, I've got a question for Claudio. You got my interest. You said you lived in Japan 20 years ago. I lived there, I don't know, 35. I lived there in 83, 84. And what fascinates me is to mention Japan and diversity in the same sentence. Now, let me explain. When I lived in Japan, it was a long time ago. You know, a lot of the people are dead and a whole new generation has come along. But it was extremely homogenous. You know, things like the nail standing up gets hammered. I was a gaijin, you know, in a time where you would go to a bar and there'd be signs that said Japanese only. And I'd say, Nihongo shaberimasu. They'd say, no, Japanese people only. You know, I'd be very interested to sort of qualitatively, and Yoshimura-san, I'd be interested in your opinion too, but how things have changed. I haven't been back to Japan in all these years, and I just would like to get a sense of what it means, what diversity means in Japan now.
Yes. Well, if I may, first, yes, when I was there, you know, I started seeing these, you know, the beginning of these changes. You know, you would go to different, different parts of Tokyo, and I was actually based in Yokohama, and you know, I was going to Tokyo quite frequently. But yes, it's still, you know, when I was there, there were just the beginnings of these kind of diversity, you know, happening. So I totally understand what you're saying, because 35 years ago, it would have been even worse. And I still remember how it was very interesting, because what you're talking about, I am seeing as a foreigner in Japan. And that was actually a good thing. You know, people did not recognize that I had, you know, like, you know, just on the streets, you know, I could just speak English and people would treat me really well. And I had friends of mine, you know, coming from Brazil, you know, that had both parents that were Japanese, and they spoke no Japanese, and you know, they looked Japanese, they spoke no Japanese. They were not treated very well, you know, because it's like, oh, you're a disgrace to our to our country, to our culture. But you know, it's but things have been changing a lot, and Japan has been adapting a lot. That's one thing about Japan, which is how quickly they can adapt, you know, to new ideas. At the same time that there is the dichotomy of the tradition, and you know, this, I remember when I was there and seeing technology that I would not see in Europe for another 20 years, you know, and there was, and you had like these thousands of years old, you know, temples, and you know, this new technologies that you will not see, you know, 20 years on in the rest of the world. So there is something about the adaptation and how quickly, you know, they can change their minds if they set their minds to it. That's the interesting thing. If they set their minds to it, they are very quick to adapt. And if they say, okay, now what is happening, what has been happening in Japan is the Japanese population has been, you know, growing older and older. So that has been something that they have been trying. At that time, they had been trying to bring foreigners, you know, to work in Japan, because, you know, you had a lack of workforce, you know, in Japan already. Now it is, okay, bringing in more diversity, bringing in the women into the workforce, bringing in, you know, new foreigners into it. And so they know that they need to have diversity to actually survive. So it is, you know, something that if they set up, you know, their minds to it, they can do it.
So is that on par then with what happened in the 60s and 70s with the Toyota production system, and basically, hey, we need to do this, and the whole country went that way, right? And that's why they were so powerful in the 1980s. Is it? I don't sense the same passion around this, but maybe you would have a better sense of that, Sachiko, in terms of understanding, you know, how passionate are companies in Japan to make this change, and you know, how would you compare it with kind of the modern industrial revolution of the 60s and 70s?
Thank you. I think you're very right that there isn't really the passion, or maybe comparing to the 60s, 90s, but I think many companies are feeling that to survive, they need to change their their mind to more like diversity of force, working globally. As you know, there are large companies and great companies like Toyota that are really working all around the world, but like 80% of the Japanese companies are small and medium-sized companies. They have just still started to do globalize. So I think it's slow, but the Japanese companies are feeling that they need to go globally. That is something that maybe not as passionate or like powerful than the industry like in 1960s, but I think we know that we have to change, otherwise the Japanese population, as you mentioned, is going older and shrinking. So what we need to do is have to work globally, and that's something that all the companies are feeling, because we have many Japanese small and medium companies asking us how to do business abroad, which is really something that I feel it's been different from maybe 10 years ago.
That's great. Our next question is from Hank Marshall, who's with the City of Phoenix and also the Honorary Consul for the country of the UK in Arizona.
Good morning and good evening to both of you. I'd like to say that the City of Phoenix for 20 years has been contributing to the bilingual effort. We have a sister city in Himeji where we have been sending 8 to 10 people over as part of our Teach Abroad program, and we're very proud of that. So I'd like to say we could ramp that up to thousands, but I'm not sure that's reality. But we like to think that we're doing our part. If I could, I heard Claudio mention that the Japanese population is aging. And the numbers I've read are something on the order of 33% of the population is over 60. Then I heard Sachimura talk about the declining population. Again, numbers I've read is that last year there were, for the first time in 100 years, there were less than 1 million people born in Japan. But you cobble those two together. And then another thing I read is what Japan calls the irregular worker, that the person who's working part-time or in a temporary job makes up roughly 40% of the total workforce. So if you look at that in aggregate, how do you see that impacting the kind of growth and the expectations you want? Because when you bundle all that together, it makes for a large hurdle to get over. So I'm curious from either one of you how you look at it and look at it, not from a diversity point of view, but rather a large hill to climb. Thank you.
Yeah, and for me, yes, I see, yes, these are major challenges that Japan is going through. Yes, the population is declining, is aging. So you have, all the social welfare and social systems, that now need to pay for, the aging population. And, you have so if you look at all the forces that are happening, and if you look at, yes, the new type of worker that does not want to be working in these big conglomerates anymore. They want more agile, they want more innovative. They don't want to be even working that long hours. As Yoshimura was saying, it's there is. I think that's yes, this thing about wanting to bring, it is a need, to bring other people, from other countries into Japan. It is a necessity right now because, Japan cannot sustain right now, looking at, social welfare and looking at workforce, looking at all these combined, forces. They cannot afford to just have, the Japanese population in the workforce. They need all the help that they can get right now. And but also, with that, there are also the other challenges of the different cultures, coming into Japan. The Indian culture is completely different than the Japanese culture. That is completely different than the, people from Hong Kong or from China, even neighborly countries are completely different. So that will be a challenge, but I think that it is something that will need to be, they need to be adapting to. So yes, it is not just a hurdle. It's going to be a very steeping, hill, to go through. But yes, I know that Japan knows how to reinvent itself, as they have done many times over.
So Yoshimura-san, what's the answer? There's several different components here, aren't there?
No, I don't know how to answer, but one thing, of course, it's challenging, but I think the older generation, we are getting older, but actually comparing to like the older generation, like maybe 30, 40 years ago, the older population is more maybe healthier, and they're still working, they're still willing to work. So what we right now is trying to actually have more work forces from the older generation. They're still very energetic, and so we have like a early retirement system. But actually, there's not many older, my senior ex-bosses were actually working still. So I think it's one challenge actually, because we're getting older, but maybe we can use the workforce in a very different way. And another thing is like the Japanese companies know that because we're shrinking, they need to have productivity more. So as many of you may have read, like the productivity comparing Japanese company to the US companies, the Japanese companies is still very low. So I think the Japanese companies have challenges on there. So we are shrinking and so different, we have challenges, but I think what we can, if Japan can actually have a more new idea using the older workforce and also changing the productivity, I think there's another chance for Japan to actually continue growing.
One of the things, and I'll bring back Aridi, Leila Aridi Afas, it's because one of the key points I think that she made was that Toyota actually is quite progressive around diversity and gender balance and management systems overall. But those of us, I think, that work with Japanese companies know, like Toyota's system is different from GM's. GM down to the suppliers is relatively uniform, although obviously GM is a little bit more advanced in terms of its systems. It always struck me that Toyota and Honda and the key big companies at the top were much more advanced than the people down in the chain. Nippon Denso is still very strong, but then down below them, their management systems, maybe that's the 80% of companies that you mentioned, Yoshimura-san, that are small and medium sized in Japan, and that's where the change seems to be the most difficult and will take the longest amount of time. What's your perspective on Toyota's role perhaps and JETRO's role, and be able to kind of pull these people up into systems that help them and help the country based on the very difficult demographics that Hank mentioned?
So thank you for the question. For JETRO, like the governmental side, what we're doing is helping out the small and medium companies to actually export and also maybe have their offices outside the world. We have a training program, and also we have subsidies to actually help them to actually do export as well. Maybe for large companies like Toyota, as they're already in around the world, what they're doing is actually trying to actually use more different SME, small and medium companies that have technology. They're trying to actually use find out more SMEs, special technologies that haven't found. In Japan right now, there's a very popular program, drama, focused on small and medium companies that were really small companies that actually made rocket small components, that they succeeded working with a large company. So I think that's something that maybe the government and also the large companies can help out for the SMEs.
Great. We're at the end of the program, but just a couple quick questions for you, Yoshimura-san, regarding what's hot right now from market standpoint. What are some of the hot markets that you're seeing in Japan? You know, here something like the cannabis market is big, and that's, you know, not available yet, I don't believe, there. But what are some of the either technology or manufacturing or healthcare markets that you see as up and coming in Japan right now?
I think because Japan is an aging population, I think the healthcare system, also some services, and also like some technologies in helping out like more older people. There are so many new technologies trying to focus on that area, and also something is changing is we have many small startups companies that are trying to work with not only in Japan but also outside. They're looking for partners. So I think in startups there's so many different kind of technologies, but also there are like small, really unique ideas in maybe not just healthcare, but also in technology mobile areas. So I think if the chance is maybe looking for a startup in Japan working together, that might be very interesting as well.
Okay, that sounds good. Are you ready for the Olympics 2020?
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yes. So we have so many new trying to change Japan. When maybe 30 years ago, when we tried to go on a subway, you couldn't find any English, but we have many English signs as well. So I think we're looking forward and very ready to have many people coming to Tokyo for the Olympics, and also for looking for workforce as well, maybe.
Very much so. So that leads us to the last question, which is a little bit off the record, but it builds off of what you just said. The big controversy now in the Tokyo subway system is the Yamanote line is adding a subway. And it actually, that subway station is 2 stations from where I used to work. And so the name of it is supposedly going to be Takanawa Gateway. So it's an actual English word. And apparently when they told Japanese people what their favorite name for that station, Takanawa Gateway came in at number 130, most favorite. And so clearly that's not a favorite. So is this controversy ever going to be able to be settled? Is it going to be called Takanawa Gateway, or is it going to be something else?
I'm not sure about that, but I think the younger people are really more open-minded. So I think that might be the new name. I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, and I'm presuming that it's part of the Olympics building and the infrastructure building and having English words. The Japanese had put together a new subway map for the Yamanote line, and so they started putting weird English names around all of the different stations. And a little bit skibbit, kind of little bit not strange, kind of weird stuff, really weird stuff. So thank you so much, Yoshimura-san, for your time. Thank you so much, Toyama-san. I don't think I've said that before, but Claudio, thank you so much for your contributions. And we'd love to thank Leila Aridi Afas for her contributions as well. Remember, if there are any questions and topics that we didn't cover, send those in to us, and we'll be happy to handle those separately. This will be a blog post with the video, and you'll see that soon in the next couple of weeks. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day and a night.